And notice verse 25. But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son and gave him the name Jesus. He had no union with her. There was no consummation of the marriage on the part of Joseph and Mary until after Jesus was born. A loving marriage relationship is a beautiful thing, and what God intended for this matter of family life. It's a context for family life. In love with one another. Joseph had a deep love for Mary, I think, obviously. And Mary, in turn, a deep love for him and respect for him. And took her to be his wife. You see, God didn't want Jesus born into a single-parent situation. He didn't want any of that kind of reflection of an illegitimacy that would be reflected in that. He wanted him in a family situation, in a family life, in a loving relationship where there is a father and a mother to provide that kind of guidance and that kind of care. God desires that we have a loving relationship with Him, first of all, and then, of course, with one another. That's another aspect of this table we observe today. The love of God represented here in the sacrifice of His Son, but also the fellowship that's ours as we partake together and share together in this celebration of this Savior that is ours. Well, a faithful devotion to the Lord, a loving devotion to her husband, and then also a very caring devotion to the children of her family. Jesus was the firstborn. Joseph knew her not until after that. But then they had other children. Over in the 13th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, we're told about the visit of Jesus after he'd begun his ministry, going back to his hometown, and began teaching the people in the synagogue, amazing them. This is in Matthew chapter 13, verse 53. Where did this man get this wisdom, these miraculous powers? They're puzzled by all of this. Now notice verse 55. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Joseph, carpenter by trade. So he is known as Joseph's son, Jesus. Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Mary had 4 other sons after Jesus by Joseph. And aren't all his sisters with us? At least 2 sisters, 2 daughters born to him. So a rather large family. At least 4 sons. You know how many daughters? At least 2. Part of this family that Jesus grew up in. That were his siblings, those who were partners with him in the home experience. And we know something, get a little insight into the kind of home life that they had by the reference to the incident in Luke chapter 2 of them going up to the temple. You remember when Jesus was 12 years of age, the feast of the Passover? And while they're up there, they have, of course, observed the Passover. On their way back home, missing the boy Jesus. He stayed behind in Jerusalem. They were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day, and then they began looking for him among their relatives. Typical boy, you know, he's out with his relatives, his cousins and such. He's somewhere in this company of those going back to Nazareth. No, he wasn't. And after they discovered it, when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. And after 3 days, found him in the temple court, sitting there among the teachers, listening to them, asking them questions. Interesting incident here. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. Now notice, when his parents saw him, verse 49, they were astonished that he was in the temple and speaking with these scribes and Pharisees, these teachers of the law. His mother said to him, notice, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. Don't you know we disturbed you? You're not with us." What kind of a son are you being? And of course Jesus replies, "Why were you searching for me? Do you know I had to be in my father's house?" She refers to Joseph as his father. That's his, of course, stepfather, but not his legitimate father, which is God. But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then they went down to Nazareth with them, and then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. Catch that? Jesus, obedient to these that were his parents, that he understood his parents. Obedient to them. Being obedient to your parents. Is that anything that we need to emphasize? It was part of this family's pattern. This was a family that was caring for one another, that had a concern for one another. Obvious here in this concern of Mary and Joseph over Jesus, but it's also expressed in another incident that's rather interesting, over in Mark's Gospel, chapter 3. This is Jesus beginning his ministry, his public ministry. And it tells us, verse 20 of Mark chapter 3, Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. So many people pressing in on him, wanting to hear him, wanting to take and be touched by him. He was performing healing miracles already. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him. For they said, "He's out of his mind." Now, his family. Notice verse 31. Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. Standing outside. His mother and brothers, you catch that? These siblings were a part of this mother's care for him. Now notice at this time no mention of Joseph. We think Joseph passed away somewhere in this interim between the 12-year-old incident in the temple recorded in Luke and this beginning of Jesus' public ministry. So it's Jesus was the firstborn, oldest in the household, and then these four brothers that have been named, and these sisters, and this whole family comes. Mary said, "We've got to do something about him. We need to take care of him." She was concerned about him. Not eating? Come on. That isn't right. And this way in which he's conducting himself, this ministry that he's carrying on. Now Mary had some insights into that. We know over in the Luke's Gospel chapter 2 how she hid away a lot of these things and connected with his birth, that in her heart, and thought about them. But still there was the concern over this son who was apparently, they thought, not able to handle things himself. He needed some help, so they were going to give it to him. That was his mom leading the pack, his mother and brothers, and they sent someone in to call him out. And Jesus declines. "My father, my mother, and my brothers are those who do God's will." He's dedicated, committed to this ministry.